Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Electronic Planning and Works Committee meeting on this, the 18th of May, 2022. This is a special public input meeting regarding the region official plan and draft land needs assessment. The intent of this meeting is to listen and to learn. No decisions will be made at this meeting. Following this meeting, the project team will review the comments received and will report back to the Planning and Works Committee. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, committee members are practicing physical distancing and are participating electronically. I am currently the only member of council here in the council chambers. I will now call on the committee clerk to perform the roll call. Erin?
Thank you. Regional Chair Redmond. Councillor Verbanovic. Councillor Jaworski.
Here.
Councillor Clark. Councillor Jowett. Here. Councillor Erb.
Here.
Councillor Nowak.
Present.
Councillor Kiefer. Councillor McGarry.
Present.
Councillor Armstrong.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Strickland. Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Councillor Galloway.
Present.
And Councillor Shantz will be joining us later on. And we have regrets from Councillor Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Any declaration of pecuniary interest to be declared under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. Okay. So the meeting has two parts. The first, the staff will be doing a presentation, approximately 10 minutes. And then we have currently 25 delegations to present to council. Or to committee, rather. So we'll start off with the presentation from staff, and I'll call on Rod Reusser, our commissioner, to introduce.
Thank you very much, Chair Galloway, and thank you to everyone for attending today's special public input meeting on the regional official plan amendment that we're creating in this year. This meeting is an opportunity to members of the public to provide feedback on the land needs assessment, which was circulated in April of this year. The intent of the meeting today is to listen to feedback. We do not, as Chair Galloway indicated, we do not anticipate any direction or decisions from Regional Council today. Next slide, please. Let's start with a quick summary of why we're here today. If you recall, on April 12th, we released the draft land needs assessment, and we indicated that the following 6 weeks would be a time to consult and engage with our community on what growth option best aligns with the community vision for growth. As we're all aware, we're one of the fastest growing places in Canada and are considering how to accommodate this growth in population and in jobs until 2051. We're almost 5 weeks into engagement on the land needs assessment, and as you can see, we've had 2 virtual public engagement sessions in April and a combined registration of over 100 people. A live streamed all council education session with Steve Pomeroy as our guest speaker, and ongoing engagement surveys through Engage WR, asking participants to provide us thoughts on growth options. During this time, we've also been meeting frequently and consistently with our area municipal colleagues to discuss what growth option best meets regional and area municipal community building objectives. In addition, we've been meeting with members of the public and groups who've requested more information on the process and growth options. This lands us at today, May 18th, and which is a special input meeting where we're all here to listen. It's been great to see so much interest in this process as we move towards June 15th, when we'll be bringing a recommendation to council. May 27th is the deadline for feedback, and we'll take everything that we've received into consideration and come back on June 15th with a preferred growth option, which regional council will then discuss, and we'll make a decision at that point on how to proceed. We'll talk about how we'll arrive at the June recommendation report and what to expect in that report later on. Now I'd like to hand it over to Danielle DeFields to take it from here. Danielle?
And just before Danielle gets started, if I could, I just wanted to mention, I forgot to do one thing, and just wanted to mention that Chair Redmond is now in the council chamber. So she is joining me here in the council chamber. And I did forget to do the very important land acknowledgement. So I'd like to acknowledge that the land in which we gather virtually today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements and their contributions to our community. Okay, Danielle, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. To provide context for the feedback today, we've outlined the growth options contained in the land needs assessment on this slide. There are two types of land need calculations that are determined through the land needs assessment. One is for community area, which are lands for population, commercial, and institutional growth. Another is for employment area need, which refers to lands for growth like business parks and industrial land. This slide shows you visually how the employment and community options are connected. So starting on the top of the screen, you can see 3 community area growth options. As you can see from left to right, there's increasing intensification and density targets across the options, which result in varying land needs. The land need is greatest under option 1 with the lowest intensification and density target, and land need is lowest under option 3. The employment options are associated with the community area options. These two generate the same employment area land need for the region as a whole, and they vary in employment area allocations by area municipality. Within the two options, there are 2 choices presented in the amount of employment growth estimated to be accommodated through intensification of the region's existing employment areas. Next slide. Gathering input into these growth options, given their impact on the future of our communities, is really important. The intent of this slide isn't to cover everything that we've heard so far in detail, but instead to highlight some of the higher level feedback received, as well as some of the input we've received that we expect may be covered through some of the delegations today. As Rod mentioned, we've held 2 public engagement sessions and had an opportunity to have some really thoughtful conversation and listen to a variety of different perspectives. We've also had a survey on our Engage platform, which is open until the end of May. Some of the preliminary feedback we've received suggests a general understanding of the kind of community people would like to see in the future. This relates to having conversations around climate action, protection of agricultural lands and natural heritage resources, and ensuring a range and mix of housing. We have received feedback and opinions on all of the growth options. We've also received general feedback for consideration of additional growth options and a submission to consider a 4th option that proposes an intensification rate of 65% and a density target of 60 people and jobs per hectare, resulting in no community area expansion. There have been submissions received through Engage WR that request consideration to remove option 1. There's also feedback on the application of the provincial land needs assessment methodology and interpretation of the steps in the methodology. A key difference is the development of forecasted housing market demand by type. We're committed to working with our stakeholders to better understand potentially different interpretations and the approach to implementing the methodology and reporting on the final results. We've met with many stakeholders to date to discuss some more specific feedback received on the land needs assessment, and we look forward to continuing to do so as we move forward towards June. We recognize there's only 5 minutes per delegation tonight, so we'll make sure as we move forward, we're working to understand all of the feedback received, and we'll outline how we've considered it in the June report. Next slide. We've had frequent conversations with our area municipal colleagues as well. We continue to meet with planning heads, CAOs, and area municipal staff on a frequent basis, and these meetings have focused on collaboratively working through questions around each of the growth options area municipal allocations, and identifying and prioritizing potential areas for more community area or employment area. We've consistently heard that there's a general understanding of the common community building objectives, both at the regional and local level. These include things like completing communities, climate action, and being fiscally responsible. We understand that most area municipalities anticipate providing their own recommendations through council reports prior to the June 15th date. Next slide. So how will feedback and other considerations be used to arrive at a preferred growth option on June 15th? First, we'll be receiving an evaluation report from our consultants, which assesses 27 evaluation criteria, structured under 6 themes, conducted through a climate lens, and based on direction from the growth plan and corporate strategic plan. In addition to the evaluation report, we'll also receive a financial impact assessment report and a greenhouse gas emissions report. These reports will provide a recommendation on the preferred option. We'll also consider the opinions and contributions of our area municipal colleagues. These discussions are integral to the process getting to a June recommendation report. And we will be taking into consideration the input from our community stakeholders and the public as well. Next slide. We're committed to listening and working to understand the feedback and opinions on the land needs assessment and the growth options. There's a deadline for feedback on May 27th, and we're working towards the recommendation report on June 15th. What you can expect to see in this report is a fulsome summary of what we've heard throughout the engagement period. The report will outline and categorize by high-level themes what we've heard from our consultants, the area municipalities, the public, and stakeholders. High-level responses will also be provided in the report. After comprehensive analysis of all the technical analysis and opinion-based input, we'll then provide a recommendation to Regional Council on a preferred growth option that reflects how to best achieve our community vision. The June 15th report will also include mapping associated with the preferred growth option. Next slide. Thank you to everyone who's provided input to date and who will provide input today through the meeting. We look forward to having more conversations with any stakeholders that would like to meet with us, and we're also working through all the different feedback that we've received so far. I'd like to end the presentation with a quick reminder of the next steps in the process. In June, we'll bring forward 2 reports. The first will be a recommendation report on the growth options, and the second will be an information report on the release of the draft regional official plan amendment that will be focused on growth-related policies and mapping. We'll then be moving into the public engagement period on the draft regional official plan amendment, moving towards a virtual public open house in July, followed by a statutory public meeting. We're targeting adoption of the amendment in August. Next slide. That concludes our presentation. We're looking forward to hearing the input this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Danielle. Okay, we're now going to go to delegations. I would like to remind all delegations of some of the guidelines for participation. Please leave your video and camera turned off and your microphone audio muted until you're called upon to speak. Today's delegations will be allotted 5 minutes to speak. Groups of 2 or more will be allotted 10 minutes. Any delegations who registered after the deadline, and we have a few of those, will be allotted 3 minutes to speak. These time allotments are in line with the pilot project that has been undertaken since 2021 and will continue to be followed this afternoon. We also ask that you leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed. You are then welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being webcast live via YouTube. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate removal from the meeting. We don't anticipate this to happen, of course, but just to put it on the record, interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements, turning your camera on at inappropriate times, or any hate speech or defamatory comments. One last reminder for delegations, please do not take offense if following your presentation there are no questions from council. This is council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. And to my council colleagues, I would just remind them that this is a public input session. It's not a session for our own edification necessarily, other than, of course, what people want to present to us. So if you do have questions of clarification from the delegations, that is certainly quite appropriate. But what I do want to discourage is people asking staff to answer questions that might be posed from delegations. As Danielle has indicated, all questions the delegations raised today will be responded to in due course after staff has had time to consider them. So I would ask you to not ask those questions on behalf of any of the delegations so that we can move along quickly with what we have now is 25 or so delegations. And we'll start those. And starting off is Kae Reimer-Watts. Kae, if you are there, there you are. Welcome, Kae.
Hi, I should be able to share my screen, I assume.
You go ahead, and I will just mention while you're doing that, Kae, that typically I will give people a 1 minute warning when it gets down to 4 minutes. So go ahead, Kae.
Okay, you're able to see my screen?
We can.
Yeah, so good afternoon, regional councillors and staff. I want to start by thanking you for your service, especially during these last few trying years, and for hearing my presentation. As a local homeowner in Kitchener, a climate action and justice organizer, and a graduate student looking at the intersections of sustainability, the arts, and movement building. So with respect to the first three options for the land needs assessment presented by staff, today I'll be speaking in support of the fourth that should be on the table before council, and I hope will be given serious consideration. But I'd like to highlight a few contextual council commitments I'm aware of and have supported relating to today's discussion on how we decide to grow and use land. In 2019, the region declared a climate emergency, acknowledging how serious this global crisis is and the need to take bold, transformative action, directing staff to investigate with support possible tools for emissions reduction to bring into regional decision-making to be considered this year in the 2022 budget. Fast forward to spring last year, the region passed a motion to support Transform WR and 50% emissions reduction by 2030 in line with the urgent call to action of the latest IPCC report, ringing the alarm bells again on the need to cut emissions so our kids and societies can have a shot at a livable future. We were told to act boldly for our own well-being and survival, and that includes changing how we approach development. The region committed to strive to meet the 50 by 30 target in line with science, which was commendable, and to advocate to the province and feds to provide added support to reach this goal. Also recognizing bold sustainability action can be an amazing opportunity, better positioning the region as a leader in the growing global clean economy with many benefits across economic, environmental, and social dimensions. So for a region such as our own, where we pride ourselves on leadership and being ahead of the curve of where the future is headed, where we do the advocacy for what's needed, there's really no excuse to not live up to this reputation now for bold leadership in line with our values and commitments, not waiting for others. We need to be leading the province and feds and our communities in the direction we need to go. It's not only altruism, but self-interest, because where are the impacts of climate change going to be hardest felt and are already? In our local municipalities and communities. Who picks up the costs of extreme impacts? Often our municipalities and local residents. So it would be illogical to make this situation worse for ourselves and our communities by paving over more farmland because the province encourages it, increasing emissions, flood risk, roads and sprawl, and decreasing our own resilience. Now is the time to be visionary, to step up and really show the world sustainability leadership at the scale that's needed. So a little graphic that my wife did, we cannot allow ourselves right now to get dragged into regressive politics that will only take us backwards, undermining our resilience and credibility, especially on the most challenging issue of our time. We must say yes to the visionary leadership we need. And this is a shout out to one true champion of bold climate action and social justice, US Congresswoman AOC, and we can learn a lot from her.
1 minute, Kae.
Yep. So in closing, I imagine that option number 4 is going to be spoken to in greater detail today. But this is the option that I endorse as the most ambitious lands need assessment proposal on the table that is also in line with Council's previous commitments. An alternative, no community area expansion option, no paving over farmland, submitted to Council's attention. There are elections coming up, as I'm sure everyone is aware. And now more than ever, the citizens of Waterloo Region expect bold leadership to champion a sustainable future, moving us not backwards, but forwards. Thank you for listening and for your time.
Thanks very much, Kae. And right on the money, thank you. Any questions of the delegation? Okay, seeing none, then on to Kevin Thomason. Kevin, there you are.
Good day. Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen here, so hopefully it will come up okay. Let me know if you can see my screen there.
We can. Yes, Kevin, we can.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you. My name is Kevin Thomason, and I am a resident of 1115 Cedar Grove Road in Waterloo, Ontario. I'm here to talk to you today about a citizen's proposed option number 4. The current situation, as we know, is the Waterloo Regional Official Plan update is currently underway to determine our vision, priorities, and the form of our community for the next 30 years. Our last regional official plan created our countryside line concept, protected countryside, light rail transit, core renewal, and so many other bold, innovative concepts that we now take for granted and can't even imagine our community without. This ROP update needs to be just as bold and visionary if Waterloo Region is to compete globally in the years ahead. However, planning for the future in a rapidly changing world is not easy. Climate change is the most significant threat facing our community today, with every decision carrying an important message and having potential impact. There's been a fraction of the public engagement, public consultation, and media coverage in this ROP update compared to previous regional official plans. We need far more public input and time to understand the implications of the feedback and ideas being proposed today. Regional staff are proposing 3 growth options. However, all may be overly complicated and insufficient to meet future needs, particularly in light of the climate change commitments to reduce our greenhouse gases by 80% within the timeframe of this official plan. Option number 1 has massive amounts of urban sprawl, huge farmland loss, likely breaches of the countryside line in numerous places, and abandons the goals of regional sustainability and leadership. Option number 2 still destroys almost 1,000 acres of local farmland and creates complex inequity issues between area municipalities. Option 3 is overly complex, difficult to achieve, and places too much density at the periphery rather than the core of our communities. Citizens and community groups concerned about the 3 proposed growth options are suggesting a simpler, more congruent 4th growth option based on current trends and rates of intensification, with no boundary expansion and no farmland loss. It buys us time to see how a post-pandemic world unfolds without locking us into sprawl that may never be needed or even wanted, and it treats all area municipalities equally. Looking at the chart here, you can see option 1, 2, and 3 that are quite familiar, and then option 4 over here on the right column. The proposed growth option number 4 has a 5% intensification target that's very congruent with current rates of 64 to 70%. It has a density proposed of 60 people and jobs per hectare that is far more achievable, and 0 acres of farmland lost to urban sprawl. Why intensification versus density? Density is measured over time, including retroactively over lands already built. Thus, to achieve option number 3's density of 66 people and jobs per hectare, it will require all new development to actually achieve about 73 people and jobs per hectare in order to compensate for recent development achieving only 54. Achieving such significant density increase on new greenfield designated areas at the edges and most distant parts of our communities will not be easy. And pushing so much density to the periphery is often less ideal, as density should soften towards the edges of our communities and not be one of the most built up areas. Whereas achieving intensification rate of 65%, as we're proposing in option 4, is congruent with our current intensification rates. Thus, intensification is a far simpler and better metric than density for our regional official plan. Looking at this visually, option number 3 places significant density at the edges, whereas option number 4 spreads the growth more evenly across our entire community. The community proposed option number 4 has clear advantages over option 1, 2, and 3. It's not perfect, however, it is the simplest, most consistent, and most easily achieved. It best continues Waterloo Region's innovation and planning leadership on the current trajectory. It demonstrates climate leadership and that Regional Council is serious about achievable solutions to meet our Paris Accord commitments. It best supports expansion of ION LRT and public transit. It buys time and delays decisions on future boundary expansions until we see how the post-pandemic world, the missing middle, soft intensification, accessory units, age in neighborhood initiatives, and climate change unfolds over the coming years. And it avoids the myriad of issues with option number 2, allocating greenfield expansion to only some area municipalities and all the efforts required now to mitigate battles over land that likely won't even be needed until 2047 or later. In conclusion, we urge you to recommend and support the community proposed growth option number 4 as the preferred option. While not perfect, it is the simplest, most achievable, and most congruent option that best prepares Waterloo Region for a rapidly changing future, while protecting our thriving countryside and creating more dynamic, complete, sustainable, affordable communities. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Any questions to Mr. Thomason? I do have one, Kevin. And
yeah, certainly.
In your proposal, does it, did you take it far enough to determine whether or not there was any excess lands?
Yeah, really good question. We really want to make sure we avoid excess lands at any cost. And I think one of the balances is ensuring that we have enough land for the future without having too much land. And we worked really hard. We've got local planning experts and all kinds of folks throughout the community who've been working on this option number 4. And we worked really hard to make sure that that intensification number of 65% that we've calculated, we might need actually 66. It's an approximate number, but it's within that range, and that range is within what we're already achieving. And we don't want to get in a situation where we're trying to propose, 75 or 80% or some absurd amount of intensification. That would be too big of a leap and may trigger those excess lands that you're speaking of. We don't want to be in a situation where we're having to revoke development rights or having municipalities take away lands that they were accounting assessment on. So it's a balance, but we're pretty confident in the numbers that we've been able to come up with here. We've worked quite hard on them.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure staff will address that when they come back to us on their analysis of the option. Okay, thanks, Kevin. I have no other questions. The next delegation is Barbara Schumacher.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can, Barbara.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of 50 by 30 Waterloo Region regarding the scenarios for the land needs assessment. On November 28th, 2020, over a 2-hour visualization workshop, residents throughout the region were asked to imagine imperative changes to help us all move towards a more climate-friendly, socially just Waterloo Region. This event was hosted by 50 by 30 and facilitated by the School of Architecture Bridge student group. The pictorial results and the post-it notes captured the dreams of residents from our various municipalities. You can find this information on our website. Striking are similarities features residents want in the communities where they live. Tree-lined streets, bicycle and walking trails, walking to farmers markets, butchers, bakers, and local crafters and repair shops. Intergenerational spaces to meet and socialize, parks, green roofs, solar panels, wind generators, electrified public transit, increased density of housing with a variety of options, laneway, tiny houses, low rises, Indigenous presence with cultural spaces, and fewer personal vehicles. These dreams are not for some undetermined day in the future. The people who participated are well informed about the urgency. They recognize the climate emergency and the positive impacts that the solutions they offered will have on reducing greenhouse gas emissions locally in our province and across Canada. But individuals can only do so much. Policy decisions, funding incentives, and courageous leaders with the will to act are desperately needed. Outdated market demands, car-dependent suburban sprawl, incremental steps to transition away from fossil fuels are yesterday's strategies. If we continue to let these pressures frame our development, we have no hope. In fact, the most recent IPCC report focused on mitigation carries the grave warning that we are on a road to disaster. Even if we double down on all the technology and science that we know today, we have a 50% chance of meeting our Paris global warming target of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So let's get going. Land needs assessment scenarios options 1, 2, and 3 lack ambition and urgency. Like elite athletes, we need to be single-minded, staying focused on our goal in every aspect of decision-making, using every tool in our science, economic, governance toolbox. We must dig in and get going on the adaptation and mitigation strategies laid out for our region in Transform WR. We must work together with an expectation of success because this is the legacy we want to leave for our children. Our vision for walkable, resilient communities with affordable, zero-emission housing that supports the vulnerable and aging in our own neighborhoods and celebrates our cultural diversity and the wisdom of our Indigenous neighbors, communities with abundant food grown on regional farms, and good, accessible public transit. Scenario option number 4, developed by the community members, which was just discussed and transmitted to you within the last weeks, is the option that 50 by 30 WR endorses. We encourage you to accept and use this option for development of the regional official plan. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Barbara. Any questions of Dr. Schumacher? Okay, seeing none. Thanks again, Barbara. Next is Robert Howe. Mr. Howe, welcome.
Good morning, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm speaking this afternoon on behalf of a number of landowners in Waterloo region, including a number that have lands in Southwest Kitchener. I've submitted a letter to the region that I hope you've all received, and it contains our preliminary comments with respect to the region's draft land needs assessment. Fundamentally, our concern is that the draft assessment should not be relied on because it does not conform to the provincial land needs assessment methodology that the region's required to follow. Although there's several steps in the province's methodology, the principles behind it are not that complex. It requires the region to base its assessment of land needs on, firstly, an assessment of the demand for housing by its projected population growth, and secondly, an assessment of the potential supply of housing that can reasonably be provided in the region's current urban area boundary. The draft land needs assessment prepared by the region's consultants does not undertake either a housing demand analysis, or the housing supply analysis that are required by the provincial methodology. In terms of housing demand, the methodology requires that housing demand be assessed based on the historic propensities of people of certain ages to live in certain types of housing. So for example, based on the 2016 census, seniors in the 75 age category in the region overwhelmingly lived in lower medium density housing, almost 70%, with about 30% living in high density apartments. The region's land needs assessment basically ignores this and assumes that seniors will instead choose to live in high density apartments, assuming that about 60% of these seniors will move to apartments. There's absolutely no evidence that this will be the case, and this was the argument that was made by the region's experts in the 2013 ROP hearing, and the OMB concluded there was no evidence to support. But that's how the consultants make this land needs assessment work, by ignoring past trends and assuming that these extreme shifts in housing choice will happen. The draft land needs assessment also assumes that the region's population will mostly be housed in high density apartments at double the rate that it is today. High density apartments go from about 25% of housing units to over 55% of new housing units. And the shift that will be required to high density apartments is probably even higher than is estimated in the draft land needs assessment, because it assumes that there's a big supply of medium density townhouse development available in the built up area that simply doesn't exist based on the research that we have done. Now that brings me to the supply side of the equation. The provincial methodology requires that the region prepare an inventory of the supply of housing by unit type in the built-up area and in the designated greenfield area. You're supposed to do an actual on-the-ground inventory of the likely supply of potential housing by unit type. The reason this is so important is that most vacant land in the region is already planned, because it either has plans of subdivision or zoning or official plan designations that have already been approved, and that practically is not going to be undone. There's also a significant amount of land that is simply not available for development. The region's consultants have not prepared that inventory of potential housing units. What they've done instead is a capacity analysis, where they essentially assume that certain amounts of population and housing units can be accommodated based on density targets. It's all based on the intensification and density targets. And what they essentially do is multiply the land area by a density target to determine the capacity of that land, without actually looking at the lands that are actually available for development and how existing planning permissions would allow them to be developed. The problem with this approach is that based on the work that our consultants have done, there is no way that the housing forecast in the draft land needs assessment can actually be achieved.
1 minute.
That housing cannot be delivered. Much land they assume can be developed for houses simply physically can't be developed. And they also use a designated greenfield area calculation that is simply wrong. There would have to be even more apartments and less ground-related housing than the region's consultants are suggesting under options 1 and 2 in the land needs assessment. This capacity approach is the same approach essentially that was used by the region's experts in the 2013 OMB hearing regarding the ROP. And as you know, the OMB rejected that approach. And it is not the approach that is required by the provincial methodology that has been mandated by the current government to be used for land needs assessments. The very purpose of the provincial methodology is to ensure that there will be a sufficient supply of housing to meet the needs of the region's population. Setting an intensification target does not get housing built that people need. It is not realistic to think that families can reasonably be accommodated in high-rise residential development, which is more expensive than grade-related housing.
Could you wrap up, Mr. Howe, please?
2 seconds, sir, if I may.
Yes.
We're not just want to make one final point. We're not advocating option 1, as it likely results in expansion that is larger than is necessary, but the region should undertake a land needs assessment that complies with the provincial methodology, because if you don't, you risk housing shortages that will contribute to the shortage of affordable housing that your residents need, will impact families and first-time home buyers trying to get into the housing market, and risk a shortage of housing that is needed to provide the housing that will is needed to support the region's employment aspirations. So those are my comments.
Okay,
thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Howe. Question, Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you very much, through the chair. Thank you for the facts on how provincial policy works with respect to the regional official plan. I'll note that the first three presenters did talk a lot about climate change and taking action on that with respect to 2030. And I know you quoted some information from 2013. I'm just wondering what actions do you think figure into climate change with respect to the regional official plan?
Climate change is obviously a critical consideration, but there's more than one crisis that's happening in Ontario today. Climate change is incredibly important, but housing supply and affordability is also incredibly important. And we are not advocating the type of urban sprawl and the model of suburban development that we saw in years past. We are what the region really needs to focus on is providing the missing middle, not large single detached residential subdivisions. That's not what we're advocating. We're advocating dense, compact development, complete communities that are mandated by the provincial growth plan.
Thank you. No further questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Howe. We'll move on to, Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you, Chair Galloway. Mr. Howe, I trust that you're likely familiar with the revisions to the Planning Act as they relate to the regional official plan review process. I'm wondering if you can highlight for us, as simply as possible, what the actual most recent changes are. I think that when I talk to folks around the region, those that are actually familiar with the regional official plan know that there's been some changes provincially. And I think it's important that we note that. I'm just wondering if you can highlight some of those changes.
Right. Well, okay. Thank you, sir. So the recent changes I think you're referring to likely relate to the authority of the minister to refer official plans to the Ontario Land Tribunal for a hearing that would result either in a recommendation back to the minister or a final decision. When the region passed its official plan or adopted its official plan in 2009, it did go to the province for approval. And at that time, the province's decision could be appealed as of right by landowners to what was then the Ontario Municipal Board. The Planning Act had been changed in the meantime so that where the province is the approval authority of an official plan, an appeal was no longer permitted. But the province has now decided to change that again so that there isn't an appeal as of right, but the minister will have the option of referring official plans to the Ontario Land Tribunal for a hearing. And while we don't know, of course, how the minister is going to exercise that power, I think it would be fair to say that the types of issues that are engaged through the regional official plan, and it's also happening in other regional municipalities across the GTA that are also required to conform to the growth plan, where there's disagreements over the land needs assessments that have been undertaken. And the minister of this government, Minister Clark, has indicated it's a very serious concern for him. The province has been taking several initiatives over the last year with respect to housing. It's one of their most important issues that they've been dealing with. So I think it would be fair to say that this type of issue is the type of one that the minister might consider referring to the Ontario Land Tribunal.
Okay, thank you. No further questions. The next delegation is Craig Ferguson.
Yep, I'm here. Can you see me?
Yes, we can, Mr. Ferguson. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. As you mentioned, my name is Craig Ferguson. I'm from Parcel Economics, which is a land economics consulting firm. I'm here today on behalf of Kae Developments, who are the owners of lands within the countryside line in New Hamburg, within the township of Wilmot. Kae is seeking to have their lands included within the New Hamburg settlement area boundary to satisfy future community and employment growth in Wilmot to 2051 as part of the region's ongoing MCR. The plan proposed by Kae contemplates a denser form of development that would achieve a density of 65 persons and jobs per hectare on their lands, which is a significant improvement over the density that currently exists in Wilmot, while still providing a market-based mix of housing options. We have had an opportunity to review the draft land needs assessment and have identified concerns with the methodology and assumptions used in completing options 2 and options 3 of the community area land needs assessment for Wilmot. On May 3rd, we met with regional staff to discuss our concerns. We appreciate the time taken by staff to meet with us, and it is our understanding they're in the process of preparing responses to our questions. I want to start by saying that we agree with the direction of the land needs assessment to expand the settlement area boundary in Wilmot to accommodate 17 hectares of employment lands. The addition of employment lands in Wilmot will assist in creating a more complete community where people can live, work, and play. We are also encouraged to see the community area expansion of 107 hectares using a market-based approach in Wilmot under option 1. However, as I mentioned, we have significant concerns if option 2 or option 3 are selected as a preferred growth option, as they both assume no settlement area boundary expansion in Wilmot. This will further constrain growth in the municipality that has for many years been passed up for settlement area boundary expansions. By not expanding the settlement area boundary in Wilmot, the township will be unable to implement its concentrated growth model, which dates back to 2003 and seeks to concentrate growth on full municipal services between New Hamburg and Baden. As it relates to options 2 and 3 of the community area land needs assessment, we have 3 primary concerns which we've discussed with regional staff. First, while Wilmot has accounted for nearly 5% of regional population growth over the last 25 years, this share has been nearly cut in half under options 2 and 3. Such a significant reduction in population growth will perpetuate existing housing affordability issues and exacerbate land shortages that already exist in Wilmot. Second, under options 2 and 3, the intensification rate is increased to 45% in Wilmot. This is more than double the 21% intensification achieved in Wilmot in recent years. We have not seen any research into the feasibility of accommodating this level of intensification in Wilmot. Finally, there appears to be errors in how the designated greenfield area density target is calculated in Wilmot. This error could result in the township not being able to meet the targets identified in the land needs assessment, if not fixed. Recognizing our concerns, we've prepared an option 2A for community area lands in Wilmot that we believe will allow the region to meet all of the goals and objectives identified in the growth scenario evaluation that was completed last October. Option 2A plans for an additional 10,400 people in Wilmot to 2051. Growth of 10,400 persons in Wilmot will fully utilize existing capacity within the Baden, New Hamburg wastewater treatment plant and would therefore make efficient use of existing infrastructure. Option 2A also plans for a 30% intensification target, which is higher than the 21% intensification rate that has recently been achieved in Wilmot. Further, this option plans for a designated area greenfield density target of 51 persons and jobs per hectare, which is a more efficient use of land than the current density of 39 persons and jobs per hectare currently being achieved in Wilmot.
1 minute, Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you. This option 2A is a balanced and market-based scenario that is required by the provincial policy statement and the growth plan. It would result in a settlement area expansion of 63 hectares of community area lands in Wilmot, which is significantly less than the 197 hectare expansion identified under option 1, and therefore makes a more efficient use of existing infrastructure and land. On May 13th, we provided regional staff with a detailed analysis supporting our option 2A for community area lands at Wilmot. We look forward to discussing the details of our analysis with staff prior to council adopting a preferred growth option for the region. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ferguson. I am seeing no questions. So we'll move on then to our next delegation, and that is Marilyn Hay. Marilyn, there you are. We see you.
And I think you can hear me now.
And we can hear you, yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for your time this afternoon. I'm the chair of the Kitchener-Waterloo chapter of the Council of Canadians. We advocate for people, especially the vulnerable, the planet, to safeguard our natural environment and protect our shared future, and democracy, supporting strategies that would ensure every vote will have a voice in our governance at every level. When I was last here before the council, I and others called for an option 4 for a regional plan use expansion management strategy for the next 30 years. An option that would not put hundreds of hectares of green space and farmland at risk. I'm immensely grateful to Kevin Eby, Kevin Thomason, and Mark Reusser for leading this initiative, for giving us exactly what we requested. A plan that respects our green space and rural boundaries, protects our exceptionally productive farmland and natural groundwater filtration, and yet meets the requirements to prepare for projected population growth over the next 30 years. This plan is based on reasonable and already naturally occurring density targets, which support the 15-minute communities we're building along the LRT and other public transit lines, rather than requiring the single family and urban sprawl of a long gone and unsustainable era. This plan takes into consideration our rapidly aging population and the tens of thousands of single family housing unit stock that will be coming available within our urban boundaries. This plan means that minimum new infrastructure, for example, roads, sewer, water, power, and communication grid, will need to be built, which eases future tax burdens. The proposed option 4 supports the region's essential and courageous commitment to cut emissions by 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2040. Option 4 well positions the region to pursue more funding for LRT expansion, ensuring that we remain highly competitive even as other cities seek similar funding to follow our lead. It provides the region with a transitional plan as we acknowledge the reality of new housing needs and naturally increasing density as people seek out easily maintained options within walking distance of workshops, schools, and recreation. Option 4 builds upon and furthers the forward-looking vision for Waterloo region, which was the foundation of the last major planning process, a vision which established the region as the place to emulate in Canada. Perhaps best of all, option 4 gives us breathing space to see if the needs wrought by the pandemic continue and the changes therein, to hold off designated large segments of green space for development in the fairly distant future until we know if that expansion would really be required, to continue realizing our 15-minute communities by building up instead of out, to support aging in neighborhoods with age-appropriate dwellings, possibly releasing at least 90,000 single-family dwellings into the marketplace by 2051, and to allow the region to continue working on our collective commitment to drastically reduce carbon emissions while safeguarding farmland and investing in clean energy infrastructure. For all of these reasons, the Council of Canadians urges you to approve option 4. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much, Marilyn. And I'm seeing no questions, so we'll move on to our next delegation, Mr. Paul Britton. Welcome, Mr. Britton.
Yes, good morning, Chair Galloway and Council. Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay?
We can, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So I'm appearing today on behalf of Activa, who have significant land holdings within the region. And given the shortness of time, and I'll get right to it. We have considerable experience in land budgeting, land needs analysis, and inventory analysis. And what we've done is we have peer reviewed for the purposes of this presentation, the draft LNA, which is a capacity type of approach. So the first thing we wanted to share with you is, in our opinion, the total number of household forecast to 2051 is too low compared to work that was completed by the province, as well as work completed independently on behalf of Activa. And the result is that there will be a shortfall of housing, and in particular the missing middle, with a greater shift in housing towards apartments required. The second thing we've done is we've reviewed the key inputs of the draft LNA relative to the designated greenfield area. And the three areas that I wanted to focus on today are the land use classifications, the net area of the DGA, and the total area of vacant lands within the DGA. So the first is in terms of the land classification. In our view, there's certain lands that have been included as community that are more appropriate for employment. So what you can see is on the east side of Cambridge, a large parcel of land that's surrounded by employment uses, is on the fringe of the municipality, is not integrated with the balance of the community, but most importantly is adjacent to the Cambridge Waste Management Center. The second parcel is...
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. I'm wondering if for other people, if Mr. Britton's voice is cutting in and out, if he could get closer to the microphone.
Yes, certainly I'll do that. Thank you. The second parcel is Conestoga College, and it's quite clearly designated for employment, and the designation doesn't provide for residential at all. The third parcel is a parcel in the city of Kitchener, which is subject to a site plan application for transport truck purposes and is designated for industrial purposes. In terms of capacity, based on the land use classification, we conclude that the community area has been overestimated by about 110 hectares or over 7,000 people. In terms of the vacant land analysis, that's key. We reviewed what was considered to be vacant by the draft LNA, and just some examples. What you can see is the yellow is what was assumed to be vacant, and quite clearly you can see with the apartment construction not vacant, with further apartment construction not vacant. In terms of Kitchener and the Hunt Club lands here, not vacant. Not vacant in terms of Conestoga College, clearly developed. And this is the Ormston subdivision, not vacant. And Stouffer Woods, not vacant, clearly developed. And then it goes on. This is a good example in terms of Wollaston, where there's been significant development occurring, and it was all assumed to be vacant. And same in Grand River South in Kitchener. And similarly, in terms of the tech park, you can see the constructed building, the signage, stormwater management, all of that was assumed to be available opportunity to accommodate residential growth. And similarly in Wilmot Township, the Wilmot Recreation Center. The boardwalk, I think the GIS exercise went as far to go as it could in terms of deleting internal roads that are clearly not suitable to accommodate homes. In terms of the vacant land analysis, we conclude that the LNA overestimates the residential supply by about 361 hectares. That equates to about 25,000 people of capacity. That
1 minute, Mr. Britton. Thank you.
In terms of lands that cannot accommodate housing, these are lands that are identified for heritage purposes, woodlot purposes, stormwater management, lands owned by GRCA, Kiwanis Park, owned by the city of Kitchener, all not available opportunities to accommodate homes. And for the sake of time, I'll just skip through the slides. And in total, we estimate about 375 hectares of vacant land within the DGA is not available to accommodate homes based on that analysis. But when you add up the classification, the vacant land analysis, as well as opportunities that don't exist, we calculate about 845 hectares of community area have been considered to be capacity, and there's no real prospect of accommodating new homes on those lands. What we have done is we've gone into the actual land supply to inventory what opportunities are available for housing. And we did that to avoid the LNA capacity approach, which has been rejected by the OMB. In terms of plan densities, what we have done is we've got into the actual planning, approved plans, proposed plans, to confirm that the options 1, 2, and 3 are not grounded in the reality of planning that has occurred, and would, in terms of options 2 and 3, and I would note in terms of option 4, events today require significant replan of the DGA, given the extent of planning that has already occurred. In terms of the LNA, it's based on outdated information, quite clearly in terms of what has been built has not been appropriately considered. And most of the DGA, approximately 80%, is now subject to a plan of some sort. And there's significant lands that are considered to be constrained and not available for homes. In terms of area calculations, I have looked at options 2 and 3, and relative to some mistakes that are included within the report, which is before you, the overall DGA has been underestimated, and as a result, option 3 results in a surplus of land. And similarly, the option 4 that was presented results in a surplus of land, assuming the Watson analysis in terms of area calculations. Most importantly, is the size of expansions contemplated by option 2 are no longer supportable using the Watson LNA methodology, notwithstanding that a significant expansion is required to satisfy the growth needs of the region. This is particularly problematic given the Rapatou lands that remain under appeal can no longer be justified in front of the tribunal. In conclusion, the draft under LNA underestimates the total amount of housing that is required, assumes a housing mix that simply does not exist and cannot be achieved, overestimates the supply of available land to accommodate home, and proposes densities that are not unlikely to be achieved. Importantly, the draft LNA does not support the conclusions reached for options 2 and 3, or 4 for that matter, given calculation areas. And in summary, I would conclude that option 1 is not supportable from a planning perspective, and options 2 and 3 cannot be supported for a variety of reasons. In my opinion, a Maiden Waterloo region solution is appropriate, given taking an urban expansion requirement that is definitely needed, and using the mandatory components of the methodology. So I've tried to speed up the presentation to fit within 5 minutes, and I would conclude there, and thank you for the opportunity, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair. So if I understand you, sir, what you're saying is that in the options made available, all 4 of them, lands put in there to reach the density to density targets are not actually available lands that cannot be used for housing, and therefore therefore the plan is not accurate at all. Is that what you're saying?
That's precisely what I'm saying, Councillor Foxton, is the amount of lands that are not available to accommodate homes are significant. And that's the importance, as I was saying, of getting in to review the actual inventory that is available, assessing the inventory by housing type, but also we're required in doing this sort of analysis to look at available opportunities to accommodate growth. And that aspect of the draft LNA, which is before you, didn't go the distance as required.
I find this frightening because that means that we haven't got good, accurate information to make a good decision. Well, I really find this frightening. Thank you.
Staff will be responding to the questions that have been posed by all the delegations. So we'll hear what they have to say in subsequent time. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would like to follow up on Councillor Foxton's question, and I know, Mr. Britton, you did feed through some of those slides. I think it's likely important that we go back to a few of those and just make sure that I think this council is aware of those particular parcels of land that, in fact, they've been identified as areas of growth, and yet they've been developed already, which does skew, I think, the numbers that we'll see. So I don't know if you did pass by that pretty quickly, if you want to.
But we have heard this, Councillor Harris.
Pardon me?
We have seen it and we have heard it. And it's available to all of us to see once again. And staff will be responding to these concerns that have been put forward. So I'm not sure why we're asking for a repeat.
Okay, well, I mean, if that's the case, that's fine. We passed through that deck, and I guess we can go back. But I'll maybe pose the question directly to Mr. Britton as a plan. who I know has significant municipal experience now on the outside. I'm curious to know your opinion on the actual densities. Are they in fact achievable? The DGA density achievable on options 2 and 3?
I would suggest that with respect to the city of Waterloo, no. Cambridge, no. Wilmot, unlikely. Kitchener, yes. And I think in terms of the analysis that was done, the densities that were assumed with respect to the township of Woolwich are understated in order to achieve a significant expansion within the township of Wilmot using the LNA methodology, which is before you.
Second question, I suppose, as a planning expert, you know, what your opinions are of the options 1, 2, and 3, and now potentially that you've heard of option 4, if you want to comment perhaps on that.
Yeah, certainly I can comment on that. Options 3 and 4 are essentially the same. The difference is they use different inputs to achieve the same end result. And what the downfall, in my opinion, with respect to a capacity analysis approach, which is before you, is the pitfalls of that approach is it can be reverse engineered to achieve the same end result, which in terms of options 3 and 4 is a no expansion option. They just change the variables to get to the same place. With respect to options 2, based on my analysis, it cannot be supported using the Watson LNA capacity approach. That's not to say that an expansion is not warranted, because it certainly is, in my opinion. With respect to option 1, I would characterize that as somewhat of a parade of horrors in terms of look at what could happen. But the issue with option 1 as presented is it cannot be justified in terms of size of expansion using the provincial LNA methodology to achieve an appropriate mix and range of housing. So in my view, the options that are before you really are not options given the capacity analysis approach that was undertaken, and obviously what is built that is no longer vacant as assumed. And I would suggest that, you know, you're presented with 3 options. Option really represents, in my opinion, staff's preferred scenario number 2 that was presented last year to council, and it's bracketed by 2 that, in my view, are really not alternatives, having regard to the importance of planning an appropriate range and mix of housing to accommodate the needs of this community over the long term.
Thank you, Mr. Britton.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Britton. The next delegation is Peggy Nickels. Peggy. Okay, it appears that possibly that delegation is not in the meeting room at this, or in the waiting room at this time. We'll come back to her later on. Mr. Eric Hunsberger. Okay.
Hello.
There's Eric.
Yes, my name is Eric Hunsberger, and I'm a Kitchener resident, and I'm here today primarily to lend my voice to what a number of the other delegations have already stated, which is the importance of considering higher levels of intensification. So there are reasons other than land use to consider higher intensification rates. Higher intensification rates can help reduce drive times and increase walk and bikeability, remove the need to drive at all in many cases. It also increases the practicality of public transit. The more centered we are on the downtown core, the easier it is for people to take transit options like LRT. And more intensification and higher density construction also allows for more energy efficient buildings because your buildings have a smaller envelope and therefore less area to lose heat. And so I would argue that the original options 4 and 5 were removed prematurely in that there was not a full analysis done through a climate lens on these other benefits to intensification. And if we look at other nearby municipalities, they are considering or have agreed to options that include much higher rates of intensification. For example, 70%, I believe, in the case of Hamilton. And these higher rates of intensification also align with the intensification rates that we've seen in our region the past number of years. I believe we're an average intensification rate of around 64% in the past 5 or so years. So 65% is certainly not an extreme intensification rate. And I think we need to pursue these more significant intensification rates to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals. As other people have already presented, we've committed to a 50% reduction by 2030 and 80% by 2050. And the less intensification we have, the harder it's going to be able to meet those goals. And something like option 1 would honestly make it impossible to meet those goals, I believe. And so by removing these options 4 and 5 early, not only does it remove feasible options, but it completely changes the window of discussion. Now, option 3 seems like a much more extreme option, when really, compared with what other municipalities are considering, it's much more in the middle. And there have been numerous psychological studies that show how people prefer to choose the middle option. And so this kind of reframing has a big effect on how everybody, both the public and decision makers, I believe, view this range of options. And so personally, I would advocate for the new option 4 that Mr. Thomason proposed. I've read through his proposal on this option, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And so that's personally what I would advocate for. But I really think we need to be considering these options of higher intensification. And honestly, something like option 1 it's just so extreme in the other direction that I don't think it should be on the table at all. If you look at the amount of land used, it's 5 or 6 times that of option 2. It's just kind of completely out the other direction. And I think it again kind of pulls the discussion towards lower intensification rates that we shouldn't even be considering something down that low. Yeah, that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Eric, any questions of Mr. Hunsberger? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on then to the next delegation. And by the way, I'm going to call for a break after our 12th our 12th delegation, and we're at number 10 now. So, Kae Elgie. Okay, there you are.
Yeah, you see me. Are you seeing my screen as well?
We're seeing you only right now, and on our Hollywood squares.
Okay.
So we don't. I'm not seeing the PowerPoint or.
Oh, I see why. Share that. That's what I have to do. Okay, is that better or not?
Yes, there it is.
But not as good as it could be.
No, not the full screen.
Let's see if I can do that. My apologies. Maybe I'll just have to get staff to do it for a minute. Okay, if I can. I'm very sorry for this. Do you want to take your break now? Anyway, let's see. Here we go.
It's large enough to see for sure. If you.
Yeah.
They're working on it here too. Okay, here we go. Caitlin,
okay.
Just let Caitlin take it over for a minute.
View options.
We haven't started the clock yet, so don't worry.
Okay, it's all right. It happens quite often. Don't worry about it. Staff will make sure it's taken care of.
Yeah. Okay.
Staff are doing their magic here, so.
This is where I should have some little jokes to tell or something, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So I just wanted to share a story of how I have come to support option 4. So I live in Waterloo. I moved to Kitchener-Waterloo in 1978. And so I've kind of seen a number of things over the years. Next slide, please. Yeah. So back in, I think it was in the 2000s, I was at Waterloo Council, I think because we were getting a designation of our, we're starting the study for our Heritage Conservation District. And I happened to hear some other citizens worried about the impact of West development on the region's water supply. I learned that our water comes from a rain, and we're one of a few communities that relies on groundwater. And I hadn't known that before. And I also saw a regional staff person present these photographs of the Wilmot line and all the sensitive areas that were there. And again, I just hadn't realized that this was here. And then next slide, please. And then shortly after that, I was driving around the country and I started seeing these signs, no to ESL. And I thought, what do people have against English as a second language? I just didn't get it. But the next slide, I realized that really that stood for environmentally sensitive landscapes. And so over the years, I've just come to really appreciate the leadership that you, council, and staff at Waterloo Region have given the regional growth management strategy, the establishment of the countryside line, and also working with the private landowners who initially opposed environmentally sensitive landscapes to the point where they would put up this sign, heralding the fact that these have been preserved. So I think that people come around, and I really thank you for the leadership. Next slide, please. The other thing that happened to me, can you move to the next slide? The other kind of accidental learning that happened for me was my participation in the one book, one community thing. Because as a librarian at the Regional Waterloo Library at the time, I would always read the book. And in 2005, the book was 100 Mile Diet, a year of local eating. And I read this book and decided I'll try this. Now, I never went as pure as they did because they gave up coffee. I draw the line. But I did switch to only eating local produce that was in season. And that's what I've continued to do. So we go to the Kitchener market every Saturday, and that's what we do. We can and freeze. And honestly, it saves us hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So next slide. So, and very healthy. So this is why saving our farmland is very important to me. Next slide. But there's a number of other things. If you could move to the next slide, please. There's a number of other things that make me think that option 4 is not just desirable, but it's feasible. So I have been really involved in both heritage conservation and more recently, just making cities livable. That's my bigger concern these days. And among other things, I've coordinated Jane's Walks over the years. And this is a photo from a Jane's Walk we did in Uptown North Waterloo. Michael Brisson in the white shirt is an architect. And we went around that neighborhood and looked at ways it could be intensified, where we could put in what we're now calling the missing middle housing or townhouses, the kinds of things that previous delegates have referred to. And Michael showed us pictures of Chautauqua, New York, and said, here's areas where we could do similar things here. So I think we could be doing that throughout our cities. There's lots of opportunities. We're starting to see that with the tiny homes and so on, but there's lots of other creative ways to do it. Next slide, please. So, but nevertheless, I haven't always been a fan of intensification. I started with Architectural Conservancy Ontario being chair of the local branch.
1 minute,
and I have to say, 1 minute? Okay.
Yeah.
But priorities have changed. And so I feel the climate emergency is more important. Next slide, please. And I do think option 4 is doable. I see there's growing support among established neighborhoods for intensification and a growing realization that we must change or let climate catastrophes change us. And I'd also like to just point out to previous delegates that the housing market is so different from when I came here in 1978. And I think about all the boarded up rows and rows of boarded houses you can see on 197, along Herb Street West, because now this market is dominated by investors and investment trusts. It's not a normal housing market. So to predict it on the basis of what a more normal, to predict our future that way just doesn't make sense to me. And neither could we have predicted. In 1978, I didn't have the option of even thinking about living on the 44th floor. There's just so many other things that are available now. But one thing we can predict is that we will still need to eat, no matter what kind of creative ways to come up to house people. In the last slide, once again reiterate, if you can flip to my very last slide, I continue by feeling that, like other delegates, it is essential that we consider the climate crisis, or we won't have any place to live. We won't be able to breathe. We may have a house, we will not be able to breathe in it. So
okay.
Thank you for your indulgence of my technical difficulties.
No, you did better than I would. Thanks very much. Okay, no questions. So we'll move on to our next delegation, and that's Pat Mighton. Pat, are you there?
I'm here. I'm just trying to unmute and start my camera.
There
I think
you
I'm
are.
okay.
Yes, we got you.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Redmond and councillors. Thank you for providing this opportunity for public input into the land needs assessment segment of the official plan review. I'm here to speak in support of the option 4. My husband and I own a 136-acre farm northwest of New Dundee in the township of Wilmot. We purchased this property and moved to this area with our 2 small children in 1968. Over the past 54 years, we have seen many changes and a significant population growth in Waterloo region. Change and growth cannot be stopped. Both are inevitable. They can, however, be managed. The negative impacts of growth and change can be minimized through wise planning policies. Also inevitable is our ongoing need to eat, as pointed out by the previous speaker. Along with that goes the need to preserve prime agricultural land for food production, which is why I support this 4th option, as presented earlier by Kevin Thomason. The regional official plan is just one tool available to manage and direct change. From the region's perspective, it is possibly the most significant tool. So when the plan is under review, it's important to get it right for ourselves and even more so for future generations. The proposed option 4 arrived in our inbox late last week, courtesy of the Nith Valley Eco Boosters. I do not know Kevin Eby or Kevin Thomason personally, but over the years I have read and respected their opinions on planning issues. I do know Mark Reusser. When I saw Mark listed as one of the authors of this document, I knew that it would be carefully researched, thoughtfully presented, and in the long-term best interest of agriculture, both locally and provincially. So I read the proposal carefully, registered to speak in support of it this afternoon. Well, I believe that both council and staff have a copy of this document, so there's no need for me to go through it point by point, and that it's already been done so. The 2 aspects of this proposal that I find most appealing relate to seniors and to the post-pandemic uncertainty. My husband is 83 and I'm approaching 80. Some time ago, we decided that we would remain in our 2-story single-family house as long as one of us could drive. So far, so good. Looking ahead, we realized that we are unlikely to be able to age in place, as the saying goes. The idea of aging in neighborhood makes sense, but only if the neighborhood is suitable for our anticipated lifestyle. We are not looking for a bungalow with a front lawn and attached garage and the winding street of a community such as Morningside, Stonecroft, or Foxford Green. Building more such single-family homes in rural areas, whether for so-called active adults or for young families, seems like a completely inappropriate use of prime farmland. Seniors like us, and we know we are not alone, need accommodation within walking distance of at least a few amenities, such as banking, restaurants, a bit of green space, a pharmacy, and a convenience store. For us, intensification within a rural town makes perfect sense, either rental or condo style units. Potential options include attractive barrier-free row housing, low-rise 4 or 6 unit apartment buildings with a common room, possibly high-rise apartments where appropriate, rental units such as the Imperial in New Hamburg. Sections 3.4 and 3.5 of the proposed option 4 clearly identify the need for a new approach to seniors housing throughout the region, but particularly in the township.
1 minute, Pat.
Section 4.3 of the proposed option 4 addresses the uncertain effects of the pandemic. In the face of such uncertainty, why would we rush to put in place a plan that might miss the mark? Option 4 is preferable because it allows flexibility or more flexibility in the future. In conclusion, as you update the regional official policy plan, I urge you, councillors and chair residents, to continue to show the leadership that Waterloo Region is known for in preserving our prime agricultural land. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Pat. Any questions of Pat? Seeing none, we'll go to our next delegation and then the final delegation before we take a 10-minute break. Mr. Sam Nabi. Sam, there you are.
Hello, thank you, Chair Galloway and members of council. Thank you very much for inviting the public to speak on this very important issue. I would like to share my screen. There we go. Okay, sharing my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yep, we can, Sam, yes.
Perfect. So I'm here representing Hold the Line Waterloo Region. We are an advocacy group that does a lot of education around the importance of our countryside line in Waterloo Region. Our community is really special because we have something like this that was made by us at the local level. It was the inspiration for the provincial Greenbelt. And I'm just starting with this slide to highlight the commitments that we've all chosen to uphold to protect this line. In 2018, during the municipal election, Hold the Line sent a survey to all of the candidates, and many of you responded. Members of council, regional and at the city level, have pledged to hold the line on further expansion and to make sure that that countryside line remains where it is today. I've also included a snippet at the top there from a City of Kitchener council meeting this past August, where they were considering the draft growth plans. And also Kitchener City Council reiterated their priorities, including holding the countryside line. I mentioned Kitchener because in all of the growth scenarios we're considering today, the majority of the growth is projected to be in the City of Kitchener. So we have the City of Kitchener prioritizing holding the countryside line, and we have many of our members of regional council as well pledging to do the same. I would like to just shift to visualizing density. So when we talk about these numbers, 73 people in jobs per hectare, 60 people in jobs per hectare, it can get difficult to remember what that looks like on the ground. There's a wonderful website, visualizingdensity.ca. It's done by the Canadian Urban Institute, and they've done just that. They've looked at neighborhoods that exist across Ontario. I believe the left picture here is Oakville, and the right picture is in Leslieville in the east end of Toronto. And you can see that we don't need towers. We can achieve very high numbers of people in jobs, 220, 169, by doing compact development, semis, townhomes, stacked townhomes. So when we're talking about these options in option 3 or option 4, building new communities with densities that are walkable, it doesn't mean that we need to put apartment buildings out on the far-flung edges of our communities. I'd like to reiterate what many people have said today already, that option 1 is not a serious choice. It's not a responsible choice. It would require intensification at 50%, and that's below what we're currently doing. It would also suggest development below our current densities, which means we're going to stop building complete communities, and we're going to have to go backwards on our progress there. We are not going to go backwards on that. We are going to continue into the future, building more complete communities and more varieties of housing choice. Option 1 would mean basically a preponderance of big single-family homes on large lots that are not accessible to new families, that are expensive, that are estate lots, and that probably have 3, 4, 5-car garages. We need more diversity in housing choice, not less. So we need an option that will preserve the current urban boundary.
1 minute,
There's
Sam.
room within that grow. There's room within that to provide stacked townhouses, ground-based living forms that are not just the traditional single-family home. I'll just briefly mention this example that showed up in the August Kitchener meeting. We can house 790 people in extremes, a big tower or the old sprawling model. And there's an order of magnitude of difference in just the life cycle cost of the infrastructure required. So this suburban example would represent something like option 1, and that's not feasible. So in conclusion, on behalf of Hold the Line Waterloo Region, we really do need to hold that line. We need to protect the countryside line. Option 1 would expand past it, and that's not acceptable. We need to take it off the table completely and stop staff from wasting their time continuing to work on it when we have much better options like the option 4 being presented by community members today.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. Any questions to Mr. Nabi? Okay, seeing none then, as I said, we'll take a 10-minute or so break, so we'll resume again at 5 o'clock. So just a short break, and please be back promptly. Thank you. just a few seconds. Ready to go? Yep. Okay, so welcome back, and we'll recommence now with our delegations. The one delegation that had not been able to be with us earlier, I think had some technical problems. She is now here with us, and I'll start with Peggy Nickels. Peggy. Is Peggy in the waiting room?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And there you are. Okay. Welcome, Peggy.
Thank you. So are you ready for me to go?
Yes, you are free to go. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm so relieved to be here after having trouble getting in. Respected Chair and Regional Council, I am speaking as a member of the Victoria Park Neighbourhood Association's Development Committee. Our Development Committee's purpose is to advocate for livable and sustainable and livable development in and around Victoria Park in the heart of downtown Kitchener. Our 4 priorities for development are to provide a supply of affordable homes, balance green spaces with parkland and development, develop with climate change in mind, and include the community as an integral part of the development process. As an aside, I'd just like to suggest that scheduling a public consultation in the middle of a workday doesn't work well for most members of the public. We're pleased to see that the latest revision of the Regional Official Plan calls for housing to be carbon net zero, for at least 30% of all developments to be affordable, for inclusionary zoning, and for rental tenure zoning. Our purpose in speaking today is to call on the region to consider and choose the 4th option, focusing on intensification as advocated by community groups. The 4th option can be achieved with no urban expansion of community areas, equitable zoning and density throughout the region that supports adequate amenity space, compatibility, and appropriate transitions, and without triggering a declaration of excess lands. To achieve an equitable 4th option, we and Hal Yeager of Old Berlin Neighborhood Association suggest that any to-be-developed lands in the designated green area be zoned with a minimum floor space ratio, or FSR, of at least 1, and a maximum floor space ratio of at least 3. According to the City of Kitchener, an FSR of 3, developed at even 50% of the zone capacity, could support a light rail transit system. FSR 3 can be achieved in missing middle, human-scaled structures of 6 stories or less that can transition easily from existing low-rise buildings and neighborhoods. While we are committed to the urban intensification, that doesn't mean we favor depending on high-rises to deliver it. Smart housing and employment growth can be achieved by smart density. We support new development and urban intensification based on 15-minute communities that are affordable, walkable, green, and sustainable in the face of climate change. As we make changes to existing neighborhoods and add new ones, we need a healthy and livable mix of buildings that accommodate different life stages and sizes of households, shops, offices, and amenities on tree-lined streets with more parks in walking distance. And we've heard a number of these kinds of communities that we dream about talked about in previous presentations. Very few of these buildings need to be high-rise. Research is showing that tall buildings do not achieve zero carbon emissions any more than does urban sprawl. In fact, buildings of low to moderate heights are more affordable and environmentally sustainable. Spread across the city, they can also meet density targets while still fostering desirable and livable complete neighborhoods and encouraging the expansion of public transit. This mixed development approach is as valid and necessary in the suburbs as it is in the urban core and would help free up more land for future residents within existing urban boundaries. We urge Regional Council to consider these recommendations and comments when voting on the new official plan and vote for option 4. Your decisions now are so important for the health of our environment and our communities. Thank you, and I would welcome any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Peggy. Any questions to Peggy? Seeing none, we'll move on then to our next delegation, and that's Mr. Don Given. Don.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you.
My background is a planner with the firm Malone, Given, Parsons. I've been working in this business for over 50 years, and I bring to it experience that I hope is helpful in trying to sort out and balance all the different priorities that your council and your committee are faced with. The first thing I would like to say is that this is no easy task. When we, as planners, get into a situation where there's so many different and strongly held views, we try to find some common ground that's workable. And I'd like to tell you, Mr. Chairman, and your committee, that we have undertaken independently a review of the work that was done on land supply that you heard Mr. Britton speak to. We have conferred with him, and I can tell you that on that point, we agree. There is a shortage of land. The information that was provided to you overstates the capacity of the land that is remaining. With respect to the approach you're taking to managing growth, I think a more balanced approach is probably what would suit everybody. There's nobody that wants to discourage intensification. I think that's a good thing. But you can't force intensification on people that don't want it and want family housing and will drive to find it. On that basis, I can tell you that in calculating the land requirements in according with the provincial land needs assessment requirements, we've come to the conclusion that option 1 is not workable. It goes too far. That option 2, if modified to recognize that more land is needed, given what you heard about the land supply, that somewhere over 1,000 hectares is more in line with what is needed for your supply of greenfield land. I'd like to point out a few things here, and the previous speaker before you broke was right on when he said that we can deal with the missing middle or through intensification of our communities that we're building. We don't do sprawl anymore. That's an outdated term. We shouldn't be carrying that label any longer. What we do now are complete communities, and given the market price points that we have for new housing, of low density housing, we see most of the product being more of a ground related townhouse type of form. And that's the price point that can be afforded by new families. It's what's available that gives them a backyard, a front yard, and the ability to buy in at a price that's reasonable within your community and not commute to Stratford or Woodstock or someplace like that. What I would ask you to do, and when you consider the decisions that you have ahead of you, is that high density is more expensive to build per square foot than low density. So when you think that people will shift from a low density home into a high density home or make that choice for family, it's going to cost them twice as much for the same space. That's one of the reasons why you see people who are over 70 staying at home, and not to dismiss also the healthcare that is now available for them to stay at home and live longer in the communities that they're in. So the turnover of the residential space that's available today does not happen at the pace that people are thinking it might happen. I'd like you to go away when you think about this, is that your growth in this region is very important to the economy as well. The type of jobs that you would like to attract need a full range of housing, but including housing that's affordable by families. And I think that's available in the greenfields more than it will be available in any form of intensification. Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to take any question if that's possible. But as I said, I found somewhere in the range of 1,000 hectares is what we think is more in line with what's needed to satisfy all of the requirements of your region. Every municipality would then get a share of the growth, and they could all manage to move forward with some carrying the burdens for dealing with growth. I hope that's a fairly simple solution that you can follow. I think it will work. I know what I've seen it work in other regions. It becomes sort of the measure of what you have to do is treat everybody fairly, and you all share in the cost of growth and the burdens of growth and the benefits of growth. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gibbon. Any questions? And I'm seeing none, so we'll move on to our next delegation, which is Josalyn Radcliffe. Josalyn, welcome.
Hello, and thank you, Chair and Council, for the opportunity to speak. I am here as a mother, a long-term resident of the past 20 years of Waterloo region, a food grower, and I consider my field to be public and planetary health. My role here at this meeting in advocating for community well-being. We are facing intersecting challenges now with the inextricable links now known between social and ecological determinants of health. We cannot any longer look at issues in isolation. We know that we've made many mistakes in the past, and that has led us to the current environmental and health situation that we face today. And yet I very much celebrate, as others do, the work that's been done in our region, the innovation, the creativity, and the country line that was established. And I know that we need bold, transformative action to face the challenges of tomorrow and today. And so I'm here to support option 4 as well. And regarding food, we know from reports and research from IPCC, like in the Lancet Countdown and beyond, that there are risks to our food supply, including droughts, floods, desertification, and extreme weather that are only going to worsen over time. We cannot forget that our lives and our environment are closely tied, both here in our communities and beyond. And at many scales. We can't afford to lose any more natural land, any land that supports biodiversity, food growth, and food livelihoods, as well as clean water and air. And so I don't support any expansion to the urban boundaries because it risks far too much. And the negative consequences will by and large be felt by those who are already most vulnerable. And I agree that expansion is incongruent with the sustainable transformation we need, and incongruent with the vision for 2050 by Climate Waterloo region that looks towards a thriving local food system based on local farming that feeds much of our own community. So for my kids, for your kids, all those that come after us as well, I support option 4, an option that considers interconnected issues of social and ecological well-being and includes no expansion, because once it's developed, we won't get it back. And lastly, I want to just remind Council of the 6 stations call for moratorium on development and the need for all development discussions to happen in partnership. So I thank you again for the opportunity to share these quick thoughts with you, and the chance to call upon your courage, creative and innovative leadership to protect the well-being of us all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Josalyn. Any questions of Josalyn? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on then to Seth Wynes. Seth. There he is.
Hello there. Thank you very much, members of the council, for allowing me to speak before you today. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see?
Yes, we can, Seth.
Thank you very much. So I grew up in Wellesley, Ontario. I've started my presentation with a few photos of the countryside around where I live. Some of you might recognize the area. After I graduated from Waterloo, Oxford, I went off to university and left the area. And I studied climate change. I did my PhD at University of British Columbia. And now, as a researcher, I am working remotely and very happy to be back in this community, which I love. And so I'm participating in this meeting because I hope that we can preserve some of the things that we all hold dearly, including the areas outside of the countryside line. But I'd also really like to focus on climate change today when I talk to you, because that is my area of expertise. I know that the council cares about climate change. I know that they declared a climate emergency, as did many of the cities and townships that make up the council. And so if we're going to say that climate change is an emergency, is a priority, then I would suggest we should, of course, act like we're in a climate emergency. And what would that look like? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that compact cities leads to lower greenhouse gas emissions. This is out of their latest report. Just looking at fuel consumption alone, creating more compact communities with less car-dependent infrastructure can reduce emissions by 25%. But emissions reductions would go further than that. As other speakers have noted, when you put more people in the same building sharing walls, it reduces energy. People are less likely to buy extravagantly, to have more possessions, and so emissions from manufacturing and so on also go down. Those are the kinds of positive impacts you can have on the world that might not show up in your own ledger of emissions. So this is a really important thing. How are we doing on that front? When it comes to reducing car-dependent infrastructure, some big strides have been taken, bike lanes, the LRT, but a lot of progress yet remains. So this is an aerial photo of the boardwalk taken by satellite. You can see most of this image is occupied by car parking, storage for cars instead of for people, much more for cars than even for businesses in this photo. All of that asphalt is covering up land that could have been used for other purposes, whether that's farming or trees that would cool our communities instead of black pavement that is going to be heating them up. What are our alternatives for this? I think we're pretty familiar with it, but I'd just like to illustrate it by looking at some aerial coverage of downtown KW. This is the neighborhood I live in. I know that it's already fairly walkable because I live here without a vehicle. The LRT is right nearby. There are bike lanes that I take to go all the way into Waterloo and feel safe doing it. But when we look at this photo, we can see similarities with the last one. This is all of the infrastructure that goes towards cars in our downtown, in some of the most walkable communities in the entire region. Very large parking lots, driveways, which I haven't even bothered to add in a lot of cases, just a lot of infrastructure for cars. And so I think when we say, are there opportunities to develop, and there are concerns raised by some suburban developers about there not being enough space, if this is a city that's declared a climate emergency and wants to take this emergency seriously, then there is land available where we can put housing, where people can walk to the places where they work, can walk to the places where they need to shop. And it's quite abundant in some communities that are already on the way to being walkable.
1 minute, Seth.
Sorry, yes?
1 minute.
Minute warning.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. So I'll conclude by just saying, let's house people in the neighborhoods that currently house cars. This is a doable proposition. We shouldn't be expanding out past the countryside line, creating more sprawl and car-dependent infrastructure. If you care about climate, I hope that the council will act on it. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thanks, Seth. Any questions to Mr. Wynes? Okay, seeing none, then I'll ask Gail Schenk. There I go.
Hello. Good afternoon, council and municipal staff in all departments and all community members. I'd just like to insert, I was really interested in hearing what Seth had to say. We have so many professionals who have information for people like me on how to start to impact and reduce climate change effects. I consider this occasion to speak as an opportunity to help our community and to help myself respond constructively and immediately to the fact that we, the whole world, are in a climate emergency. As in any emergency, we must respond in the best way we can to the circumstances we are in. Our only choice is to move forward in meeting our targets
to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 50% below 2005 levels by 2030 and by 80% by 2040. This is a survival issue and not only a monetary issue. In fact, all the money in the world will not reverse the catastrophe once it's happened. There must be a change in my lifestyle and in our community's path forward. This is not where I want to be. However, it is where we are. Starting now, to commit in all possible ways to reach these targets is our choice between survival and catastrophe. No one knows all of the answers. However, by working together, we build our answers, our connections, and our capacity to start living the transition. A transition which revises and redevelops our common resources and utilizes them to lead to a healthy and safe future. This is why I support option 4 for the Regional Municipality of Waterloo Municipal Comprehensive Review of Land Needs Assessment. As I read the proposed option 4, words that came to me to describe its content were flexible, prudent, insightful, tenable, and environmentally sustainable. A shout out to the authors of this. It offers a way for, quote, council to get it right. In option 4, political input is recognized. Current information is analyzed in new angles and perspectives. And the legacy of leadership from Waterloo Region continues. I support option 4 and strongly encourage Regional Council to do likewise. Let's work together to build a healthy and safe future. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Gail. I'm seeing no questions, so I'll ask next Ian McLean.
Well, good afternoon, and Chair Galloway, Council, staff. I'm Ian McLean, President, CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, a partner in prosperity for our region and our community for over 135 years. In preparing for today, it occurred to me that good planning precedes success, and that past successes do not guarantee future success or prosperity. So getting this new ROP right is critical for the future of our community. I'm here not only on behalf of the 1,700 members of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, but also my colleagues, some of my colleagues from the Best Waterloo, the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, CEO Greg Reusser, Communitex, and CEO Chris Albinson, and Waterloo EDC CEO Tony Lamantia. Best Waterloo partners have a history of working together for local success in Waterloo Region, and as the leaders of the Greater KW Chamber and Cambridge Chambers, Communitech, and Waterloo EDC, our organizations represent thousands of local businesses that take the responsibility of working together for community benefit and business benefit very seriously. Our organizations have a history of shaping our community in an environmentally responsible manner in a way that supports necessary social, cultural, health, and educational priorities. Indeed, all of these priorities are key to our business prosperity and our collective quality of life. Best Waterloo was created at the outset of the current unprecedented COVID outbreak to connect weekly, to keep each other informed of the latest challenges of both business and community, and to see how we could collaborate on solutions. Our organizations have collaborated on other really important issues like COVID policy, all-day two-way go, more importantly, the needed new hospital in the community. And this is why we spoke together recently about the ROP process and the Watson LNA. There is undoubtedly both the housing shortfall and affordability crisis that our currently faces, and the choices made in the ROP will determine how long and how deep they last. Today's Waterloo Region Record editorial captured it for me. In a nutshell, this region doesn't have a sufficient supply of reasonably priced real estate to meet the demands of a population growing by more than 10,000 people a year. As a councillor, I've been through the ROP process before. I get that this is a very complex process of complicated land economy projections and detailed analysis of existing supply. but I've been around business and local decision-making enough to understand that the law of supply and demand also applies and needs to be considered. Our community needs tech workers and family doctors, trades, new business investment, and the list goes on. So investments and decisions like All Day Two-Way Go, Phase 2 of LRT, availability of shovel-ready industrial land, and affordability and choice in housing are essential and critical to our continued economic prosperity. The rise in average price houses that the MLS price index shows in Cambridge, going from in 2006, 231,000 to 279,000 in March 2012, up to almost $1 million and over $1 million in Kitchener-Waterloo is just mind-boggling. Undoubtedly, we do have a housing supply and price affordability crisis on our hands. The Chambers, Communitech, Waterloo EDC are very concerned that we need to be clear and transparent when assessing what the housing mix and supply and mix of housing stock will look like to take our community and its economic prosperity through to 2051. It is not clear that enough study and analysis has been done to understand the market demand for housing by housing type, because not everyone's going to want to live in a high-rise or in an urban core. We all know that many businesses are mobile and the competition to attract these new businesses to Waterloo region is fierce. Availability of talent is critical to growth projections, and note that the significant employment land needs that are recommended within the Watson LNA. We need to acknowledge people have a choice as to where they live, where they work, and where businesses invest. From our vantage point, the gap between professional expert opinions and the Watson projections is just too large, and we need to get this right. Our organizations would encourage and like to be part of further consultation to bring clarity between the huge gulf between the Watson LNA and the other local and provincial expert analysis. I know that we're all committed to the goal of maintaining Waterloo Region's position as both an economic engine for Ontario and also as an environmental leader in Ontario. So our organization, thank you for the opportunity to comment and also to be part of this critical process. We look forward to participating in additional meetings to answer the concerns we have, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Ian, for that. I had the opportunity to speak to an owner of a development recently in South Kitchener, and they spoke to the fact that I think upwards to 70% of the occupants buying those houses are from the GTA, which means, you know, with affordability of housing in across Canada, those in Toronto are pushing westward to Kitchener. And I mean, my fear, you know, down the road and even now is that, you know, folks that want to buy a home here in Kitchener-Waterloo are forced to continue to keep going west. And I mean, I hear about the climate change crisis that we're in, and I just can't comprehend how it makes sense for us to do that leapfrogging and continue to build truly on what would be more precious farmland, frankly. And so, you know, you spoke obviously of the need to have a proper mix of housing here in the region, especially as, you know, folks want to come to start businesses up in this community, especially the high-tech community. And not everyone wants to live in a condominium downtown Kitchener or Waterloo. You speak to the fact that we may not have that housing type or have not enough information on the housing type readily available. I don't know if you want to speak to that anymore, if there's more we can do to identify that. I know perhaps it wasn't as mentioned as much in the LNA as what some would have preferred, but do you want to speak to anything more to that, Ian, and what we could do to get that message across, I guess, or get that information?
I guess all that I would say is that there seems to be a great gulf between the Watson report and other what I would consider to be experts. The fact is, even as we were building in our building, a very successful high rises in downtown Kitchener as an example, the thought that all of the residents were going to be young tech workers is just not panning out. We hear that from the real estate community, that it's a mix, but nothing is uniform. Everyone is going to have their own set of equations that they go through, and certainly the mix of available housing is critical for what I think is the number 1, 2, and 3 issue that business is facing now and will be into the future, which is getting talent. No doubt people can work remotely, but not everybody, and so people will choose where they live, and most people will want to work where they live. That's, I mean, if they can do it, and so the choice and availability of choice in housing options is going to be critically important. I don't see evidence that we're there yet. And so, our organizations want to get there. We are, as I said, we're committed to the environmental issues and certainly not plowing over farmland. We represent, as a chamber, we represent the townships. We represent agriculture and food processing and the importance of that, not only to our regional economy, but to Ontario and to Canada. So this is about saying we got to get it right. That's what I would come back to. Is it doesn't seem to me that that the balance has been struck, and so I think we got to keep working at it until we get to that right spot, because it's too important a decision. If this is going to get us through to 2051, we have to get it right.
Great, that. Thanks, Ian.
Okay, the next delegation is Mark Reusser. Mark. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Reusser, and I farm in Wilmot Township near New Dundee. I'm presenting today in my capacity as Vice President of the Waterloo Federation of Agriculture. And I'm here today to bring both an agricultural and a rural perspective to the discussion about options for our preferred growth scenario, and to also encourage you, both elected and staff, to continue to plan well, protect what is good, and set an example for the rest of Ontario. We live in a very special place here in Waterloo. It is arguably the most innovative, dynamic, and prosperous urban municipality in Ontario, if not all of Canada. At the same time, surrounding the urban footprint is one of the most fertile, productive, and prosperous agricultural communities in all of Ontario. It has been identified in the most recent census as having the second highest income per acre and the second highest income per farm of any county in the province. It's the best of the best. A culture of good planning, countryside lines, the protected countryside designation, environmentally sensitive landscapes, a commitment to public transportation, an innovative official plan, and densities that surpass provincial targets all contribute to the region's success. What is responsible for the region's success other than the providence of fertile soil and a generous climate? We are the people of Waterloo. And yes, you, our elected representatives, and yes, you, our staff. Our planning regime and culture is responsible for our unique position as a leader in Ontario, and our municipal comprehensive review with its land needs assessment and the resulting official plan must again be a template for good planning, farmland protection, and prosperity in municipalities across the province. Mr. Thomason earlier today introduced a new growth scenario option that requires no new additional farmland or greenfield, and thus is truly sustainable. It recognizes and accommodates the need to provide a choice in housing type in the context of livable, complete communities. It conforms with the provincial government's requirements for the necessary land to facilitate growth, while at the same time it protects our farmland and the environment. In the 4 years since the last census, the loss of farmland in Ontario has risen from 175 acres per day to more than 319 acres per day, or 116,000 acres annually in Ontario. That quite simply is not sustainable. There is no balance. If society is increasingly reliant on photosynthesis, growing things, for both food and energy needs, the preservation of agricultural land and soil health is essential. We have a long history of visionary planning here in Waterloo, and I've used this example a number of times in front of Regional Council. If the cities of Waterloo, Kitchener, and Cambridge had the same urban densities as American cities such as Atlanta, Dallas, or Orlando, our urban footprint here in Waterloo would encompass all of North Dumfries Township, all of Wilmot, all of Wellesley, all of Woolwich, and an additional 2 more townships. There would be no farmland left in Waterloo region. We've done a reasonably good job in the past, but we need to be better. Good planning and increased urban densities and further intensification protects farmland, Decreased or static targets, as proposed in options 1, 2, and 3, jeopardize our historic success in balancing the need for housing and food production. Don't be seduced, intimidated, or coerced by those who say that we have no choice but to sprawl. We do have a choice. There is always a choice, and we need to choose wisely. There is no rush to reach a decision, as there is no deadline that can't be extended. Let's slow down the process, think things through, consider all other options, such as option 4, and consult further with the public as to what they want Waterloo Region to look like in the future. We are essentially at a fork in the road. Do we want to backtrack and give in to those who think that the answer to housing needs is more sprawl? Or do we continue our visionary planning that protects rural lands for agriculture, local food, groundwater recharge, and habitat for biodiversity, a process that respects people's different housing needs, promotes livable, complete communities, ensures affordability, and is truly sustainable? In conclusion, thank you all for what you do. Be courageous as you make tough and difficult choices. Be bold and continue to be visionary. Don't be afraid to innovate. Don't be afraid to be different. And never, ever stop speaking forcefully and eloquently to those with resources and those in power. And finally, remember there is only one landscape, and that people, the natural environment, and agriculture all have to share it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Any questions to Mr. Reusser? Okay, seeing none, we'll then go to our last 5-minute delegation, and that is Mr. Peter Eglin. Welcome, Peter.
Good afternoon, Chair Galloway, Chair Redmond, councillors, staff, and fellow residents of the region of Waterloo. My name's Peter Eglin. I live on Strange Street in Kitchener. I'm a retired academic from Wilfrid Laurier University, where I taught sociology for 40 years. Since 2018, I've taken a close interest in the process of decision-making in relation to residential land use planning and development, particularly in Kitchener, and have made a number of spoken and written delegations to Kitchener Council. I speak today in support of option 4, in relation to the regional official plan. Option 4 has been presented to you by Kevin Thomason and Mark Reusser, and has been supported in many written and spoken submissions. Given that the purpose of the regional official plan is to plan land use for the next 30 years, the seriousness of what is at stake surely escapes no one here. What brings real gravity to our deliberations, however, is anthropogenic global warming, as the First Nations are the first to say. As a sociologist, my theoretical interest has always been in the possibility of socially organized life. How is society possible has always been sociology's fundamental question. Call it the possibility of livability. But today, the question is not theoretical. The possibility of socially organized life on Earth, of livability for Earth's people, is an actual live question, pressing on us with unprecedented force. A big part of this bears on the way we put together the material infrastructure of our built environment, so as to minimize our collective carbon footprint. It has to do with the relative distribution of urban and rural land, the materials we build with, the energy resources we draw on, the size and scale of the buildings we erect, the distribution of road and rail, and the corresponding amount of traffic each sustains. So transportation is critical. And that means maximizing public transportation and minimizing the private kind. And that in turn means intensifying in designated greenfield areas sufficiently to sustain a viable public transportation system of electric buses and trains throughout those areas. In short, exclusionary zoning has got to go. Gentle intensification in the designated greenfield areas to provide the missing middle, everything from accessory units to stacked townhouses, then reduces the need for 30, 40, or 50-story high-rise towers in the downtown. According to my cursory reading on high-rise towers, they are just environmentally awful ways to build. Of course, the horse has already left that barn. Which brings me to my second point. Livability depends not just on sustainability, but also on affordability. 44-story towers of 1- and 2-bedroom condos with a handout to a non-profit to build a handful of affordable units is the last thing that's needed here, when 7,000 households are on the affordable housing waiting list and 1,000 people survive in shelters or tents. Such high-rise developments make life unaffordable for low-income people and drive them out of the region. They are, on the other hand, a gift to the investor class that already owns about a quarter of the housing in the province, while it withholds building the housing for which it's already got permits to build. You really must put a stop to that, using all the legislative tools available to you. Social equity demands it. You know how to do it. For goodness sake, do it. Furthermore, 2,500 affordable units for 5 years is not going to cut it. Inclusionary zoning is needed yesterday. Although I'm supporting it in general terms only, because I don't know the specifics, I'm not competent in them, and notwithstanding what Paul Britton has said today, option 4 has been worked out in detail. You've all received the document, as well as, for example, Hal Yeager's written submission in its support. Hal is particularly well informed. E.B. Thomason and Reusser's submission, quote, recommends a no community area expansion option 4 structured around a designated greenfield area density of 60 people and jobs per hectare and an intensification target of approximately 65%. Option 4 is based on an intensification rate reflective of recent and long-term trends being experienced in the region of Waterloo and the need to continue to aggressively promote a sustainable urban form anchored on an expanding rapid transit system, unquote. I urge you to adopt it for its considered approach to ensuring a livable future for the residents of Waterloo region based on sustainable and affordable land use development. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eglin. Any questions to the delegation? Okay, seeing none. We now have some additional delegations who registered a bit late and will be allowed 3 minutes to speak. And the first of those is Jan Dai. Jan, are you there?
Hello, I'm here. I thought I was at the end of the list, not at the beginning of the list. I will also start my video and share a screen. Share screen. Where's my presentation here? Where do I see my screen here? Hang on a second here. I do have a PowerPoint here. I got to share it. Share screen. Show all windows. There we go. Share. No, that's not it. I don't think.
No, we see it, or we're seeing something.
No, you're seeing something. I think you saw the wrong thing.
Okay.
Hang on a second. Maybe you can go. I don't know why my presentation is not showing up. Oh, there it is. There you go.
Let's be a leader.
Can you see the screen?
Let's be a leader. Is that it?
Let's be a leader. Yeah. Thank you very much. That's really it. Thank you, Chair Galloway, and the rest of council here. As you know, I did attend the information sessions a couple of weeks ago, or a month ago, whenever it was, to when there was information session to talk about the 3 options. And really, from my perspective, a lot of that was sort of a variation of the theme. They all took fundamentally the same approach, and the only thing that really varied was the amount of density and the amount of land that was going to be used or not used. And so when I saw option 4 come up, it was really welcoming, because it took truly as a different option, a different approach to how we want to approach the problem we have moving ahead of us. And so what I got back and say, when we look forward in terms of what we're doing, what are the fundamental things that we truly want to watch and be careful for, that any solution must really match and be consistent with, and that's to protect the urban settlement and the boundary lines. I don't think there's any disagreement about that. And we need to intensification from the center out. That's how you build sustainable communities. And again, sustainability, we've all heard about that as well. And that we also want to make sure that we can enable options for the future. As politicians, as staff, we want to be able to maximize and make sure we can adapt to a lot of changing things. And so we are doing this. We are getting intensification, and we are seeing that some of the things that we set out to do, we're really achieving that through our ESL, through the LRT, and through intensification, and all the things that we're coming forth now. These intensification numbers, we're really starting to meet them. And it really harks back to the time when I was a councillor in the city of Waterloo 15 years ago. We were dealing with development on the West End, an urban core that had parking lots in the middle instead of the town square that we have now. And it really took a lot of leadership, and it took a lot of courage to go out and to educate and to have public sessions and to talk with all the community leaders and talk with everybody who had different points of view to really come up with a common understanding. And we know how to do this. We as a community, we know how to do this. So I really like to make sure that we as a community stand out and take the time to do what is right, and to take our initiative, and to take a look at the two options as and go back to our fundamental principles as we've lined out. So those are the comments I want to make. We've had lots of discussion already about what the benefits are and what option 4 brings. Certainly the right approach, and I would encourage council and staff to truly look at the alternative options and make sure we continue with our leadership position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan. Any questions, Mr. Dai? Okay, seeing none, the next delegation is Stephanie Gertz. Stephanie.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Stephanie. Are you just going to?
Great.
You're going to do it by phone?
Yes, I'm just on the phone. Sorry about that. I'm just going to make sure I'm on Bluetooth, but I'm just going to make sure I pull over the side of the road to ensure that I can have your full attention.
Okay, no, we hear you, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, great. Okay, so my name is Stephanie Gertz, and I'm a resident in Wilmot Township. I'm here today representing the Food Systems Roundtable of Waterloo Region, but I'm also a member of Nisqually Boosters, Wilmot Horticulture Society, as well as Let's Tree Wilmot, and members of Citizens for Safe Groundwater, and as well as one of the founding members for the Waterloo Region Waterloo Region response to the Ukrainian crisis. So I have lots of hats on tonight. So I'm just responding more to what I've heard tonight. You've heard such an enormous wealth of information that I don't need to duplicate what others have already said. So what I want to talk about is just some thoughts. So we talked about needing to find a middle ground, needing to find, if we have 3 options, which ones should we pick? But I really want to make people aware, which one is labeled middle? How are we categorizing them? And, is number 1 really the first one or the first option? And which one is the middle option? And I have to say that we can't choose the middle option because no one wins, but we also can't choose some of the options because number 1 isn't really an option and number 3 is not really an option. I am in full support of number 4. Also, we need to consider is that the buzzwords used are complete communities. Complete communities does not mean building more houses closer together. There's a whole complexity behind it. The other option or other things that I've heard tonight is the developers using scare tactics. That if we don't plan this development correct, that there's a potential that we'll be taken to the land tribunal. Again, having that fear addressed tonight or having that brought up tonight in hopes of scaring councillors potentially into making a choice because we are fearful of going to the land tribunal, I think is really unfair. also the misinformation regarding intensification and the use of it, that it only applies to large, tall, high rises.
1 minute,
This absolutely
Stephanie.
does not. That absolutely does not rank right. As for the food famine and the climate change, so famine is increasing across the world. Billions of people are starving. They have very little food across access to them because of the war in Russia and Ukraine, but also because of droughts and forest fires. We just think we're thinking so little of our precious land that we have locally, and we need to have in good faith consider how us looking at how does a house and urban sprawl spread across farmland, and how that land is actually part of a whole ecosystem of food and food sustainability around the world. I'm confident in you, I'm confident in the councillors, and I'm confident in your expertise, but please consider heavily that people speaking in favor of the land for development are doing it because it benefits them or it benefits their businesses. All the rest of us who are speaking to the option number 4 are doing it because the benefit of others in our community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Okay, any questions to Stephanie? I see none, so we'll go on to our next delegation, and that's Greg Mikalenko. Welcome, Greg.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Greg, yes.
Yeah. I also would like to back option number 4. The 3 principals who have worked so hard on it are an interesting trio. Mr. Eby has immense, deep experience in the planning process. I contributed to some of the revisions to the official plan in 2010 and had some interaction with him. He knows what he's doing. He's cautious and he listens. Mark Reusser is a champion of agriculture and of rural life and of protecting the rural landscape. He's immensely thoughtful as well. And Kevin Thomason has an interesting background. He started as a conservative of a rather traditional sort, a successful businessman, and has now become a champion of doing what's right and of being a true conservative by recognizing the imperative of climate change, of the protection of ecological systems, and of ensuring good communities to grow. One thing I like about number 4 is that they view it as being a no-risk placeholder and that it's flexible. It recognizes that there could, forecasts aren't always accurate. They can't always be accurate. And there are unusual and unforeseen changes, such as climate change. So by going for number 4, we aren't getting our feet into setted concrete from which we can't dislodge ourselves. Another thing that I think is important is Waterloo region has the highest concentration of gravel pits in the province. And the proponents of 1 and 2 have mentioned that somewhat in the range of 1,000 hectares of agricultural land will be needed. Well, there's also the aggregate industry, which is gobbling up immense parts of the landscape, and it won't be returned to productivity as well. So that makes it even more important that we conserve as much as we can. I would also like to suggest that we have an interactive community consultation in person with all due precautions for COVID, and have a chance to really talk to each other and focus on number 4. It could use some tweaking probably, and the public can certainly benefit from reassurance that we have done as much consultation as possible and invested wisdom and knowledge to our councillors to make the right decision, if we can have such a consultation.
Okay, thanks, Greg. And any questions of Mr. Mikalenko? Seeing none, we'll go on to our next delegation, Hélène Beaulieu. Hélène. There you are.
Oh, how's everybody today? Good. It's been a long day, hasn't it? It's been a long meeting. And I can assure you that I will only take 3 minutes of your time because I have timed this many times today. Are you all able to hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, my name is Hélène Beaulieu. I am a resident of Waterloo, though I am a Belmont villager at heart. I'm going to talk about the choices you have been presented for Waterloo's regional official plan. I am asking you to please choose option 4. I believe it is the responsible and well-considered course of action that addresses the myriad crises we are facing. There are 3 critical areas to which I can speak. First, option 4 requires no additional farmland or greenfield to implement. This should be a top priority. We must not take for granted the abundance we enjoy in this community. With fewer farms and greenfields supporting urban centers, the threat of food scarcity and food insecurity becomes a more present danger. In this regard, our legacy should be the one we inherited, nurturing and preserving the region's biodiversity and agricultural abundance. Second, option 4 recognizes the vital role of accessory units. Whether you call it an in-law suite, a granny flat, 2-family house, basement apartment, or multi-generational home, this type of housing is growing because it is both desirable and it's affordable. As a real estate photographer, I see literally hundreds of houses every year through my work. I have seen how common these living arrangements are, and I believe they are a severely undervalued asset for addressing the housing crisis on more than one level. As noted correctly in option 4, the market is already way ahead of planning and policymakers when it comes to this kind of housing. And third, option 4 seeks to address my and probably your senior housing needs. In 30 years, I will be a little old woman, and my house will be one of 80 to 90,000 single detached homes returned to the market. Now is the time to implement a plan to accommodate seniors vacating family homes. There is no way to predict what my or your physical and medical needs will be going forward, but surely we know enough to make proactive choices today to ensure we will have appropriate housing when we reach our next and most vulnerable stage of life, 30 years from now or even sooner. At some point, we will all age out of our homes. This is just a practical reality. So please take a moment to consider what that looks like for you. Where do you want to be when you can no longer realistically stay where you are? If what we have available as a society does not appeal to you or maybe even disgusts you, then this is the time to design something that excites you and gives you peace of mind. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to respond.
Okay, thanks, Hélène. Any question to Hélène? Seeing none, then we will move on to our next delegation, Ali Farahani. Ali?
Hello, yeah. Can you hear me all?
Yes, we can, Ali.
Okay, thank you. Well, I don't have any huge grand comments to make. The delegates have presented such eloquent ones. I have really nothing to add to that. I'm a humble, attainable housing developer. That's my goal, my mission. That's my business. And I live on a protected farmland, 30 acres in the country. We share a crop with a neighboring farmer. And I'm actually, in my former life, a dentist and an eco-dentist. I've actually had Canada's first eco-friendly dental office published, along with research done here at the University of Waterloo. This was in 2006. And my Bachelor of Science is in Conservation Ecology. So please share what I'm about to share with you comes from a conservation and ecology in mind. What I'm actually looking for particularly is whichever option is chosen. Again, I have no comment on whatever option, but whichever option is chosen, I'm wondering if in the new regional plan and the new revisions, if we could have a an allowance or permission for large lots in the country that are basically already developed. There's already a large estate home or something on them. If those are allowed to be severed and the excess land, excess farmland, which they have, such as 10 acres, 15 acres of farmland on these estate homes, which are impractical to farm. I know that because, again, I'm sharecropping, and we can't get, it's just impractical for these small 10 acres, 15 acres to be farmed well, efficiently. Can we use these to add to attainable housing? So we're not, sort of going in the middle of the countryside and taking out big 50-acre, 100-acre farms. Never. I would never want to do that. I shared with you my background. I'm wondering if there's any way, whichever option we choose, if there's some kind of a asterisk or some kind of a sub permission that could be given for, in a way, it's sort of like a, the secondary dwelling. It's a little bit like that, except on a scale for an estate lot. Can we create multiple secondary, third and fourth, living accommodations on these large estates, country estates that have already been developed, and use that land more efficiently without destroying prime agricultural land? That's what I'm wondering if we could add in our next review.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Staff will get back to you in that regard. Any questions to Mr. Farahani? Seeing none, then we'll move on to what I have as our last delegation, and that's Mr. Rick Pereira.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair and Councillors. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Rick.
Perfect. I'm not a big delegation. My family lives in KW. I'm not in agreement with building beyond the countryside line. I think for the environment, I think it is important that we have limits. And so I'm not in agreement with option number 1. However, I think option number 2 provides a better balance between environmental concerns and providing affordable housing. Affordable housing is, unfortunately, it's a critical issue, and it's getting worse by the day. I have 2 kids that are at university, and I do worry about whether they will be able to afford a home in our region. I do like the fact that many of the proposals have advocated for an increase in density around the ion stations. But the one concern I have is I've seen no increase in development in density around the proposed Breslau GO transit station. And by that, what I mean specifically is, unfortunately, I don't have a big fancy presentation, but basically I'm looking at the area that's bounded by Victoria Street, Shant Station Road, the railroad tracks, and Fountain Street. This area here is going to be impacted very heavily in the next 30 years. There's the Highway 7 that will be built. It'll have interchanges at either it'll be Greenhouse Road or it's going to be at Shant Station Road. It will have the GO Transit Station, which is going to be here. The area that's in orange has already been zoned urban, but I do believe that we should be considering those areas that are in green also, for a few reasons. First of all, they should be allowed to grow simultaneously with the major changes that will be happening to this area. Second of all, I think we got to support the ridership at the GO Transit Station in Breslau, just like how we were trying to support ridership with the Ion. And also to support the new Thomasville commercial and industrial areas. The industrial areas by Thomasville is up here. The commercial areas is in this area here. And I think that the time is right to be looking at switching this over to urban as well. And that's pretty much all I have to say. It's the only thing I wanted to point out. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Foxton.
If I may, through you, Chair. Rick, you know something we don't know about the Highway 7? You said it's going to be built?
Well, they bought the land, right?
In our lifetime.
They bought
in our lifetime.
And,
Yeah.
and would it not be occurring within the next 30 years? Do you?
It's been sitting a long time, Rick. I don't know.
Oh, I know. I know it has, but I mean, they finally bought the land. They do have a lot of the planning done. I expect that it should happen within the next 30 years.
I hope they hear your voice.
Well, I hope I'm right. I mean, all I'm thinking is, you know, 30 years, obviously that's a long time. And that highway and that GO transit station is going to impact this area tremendously. 30 years from now is the next time that we're revisiting the regional plan. I think this has to be considered. That's all I wanted to point out.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick. No further questions. So that concludes all the delegations that have registered. And I want to thank all of those who did take the time and the effort to come out to today's meeting. I'm sure many of them are still on the call, and we appreciate that very much. Now, we also received some correspondence, and I should note that all correspondence received by the Regional Clerk's Office regarding the consideration of the Regional Official Plan and Land Needs Assessment has been compiled and included on this addendum agenda for Council's consideration. Any additional correspondence received after the addendum agenda was sent up until 2 p.m. this afternoon was sent to Council via email and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. And any correspondence received after this meeting will be sent to Council, included in the June 15th meeting agenda. And I also want to thank some other residents that have emailed Council directly. You've received quite a number of submissions and directly through email on their perspectives of tonight's agenda. And as always, there are several ways to share your views with Council, including delegating, emailing, or visiting the Engage WR website. So in conclusion, I just want to remind everyone that on June the 15th, the Planning and Works meeting, there'll be a recommendation report on the draft land needs assessment and information report on the draft ROP amendment. And then scheduled for July the 20th, we would have the statutory public meeting. This tonight is not a statutory meeting. This was an extra meeting that we put on for the process. But on July the 20th will be the statutory public meeting to consider submissions from the public again on the draft ROP amendment. So with those concluding remarks, the meeting is now adjourned, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Safe drive home, folks.